stop right now. Whatever you are doing, let it go for a moment. This is not for everyone listening. It is for you. You have been carrying something quietly for a long time, and the strange part is that most people around you do not even know how tired that has made you. They see you moving. They see you showing up. They see you answering, helping, carrying, holding. But they do not see the place in you that has been asking the same unspoken question over and over again. Why does it feel like I'm standing at the edge of something that should already have opened? You have not been imagining that tension. You have not been exaggerating the weight of it. There is a reason the ordinary rhythm of your life has felt slightly off, as though one part of you is still waiting for a door that the outside world says should already be open. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you are going to recognize what has been happening, why it has been happening, and what it has been trying to tell you. By the time we close, you are going to recognize the signs that have been repeating around you with unsettling precision. You're going to understand the pattern underneath those signs, the one that has quietly shaped the way you carry effort, silence, and expectation. And before this ends, I'm going to speak a declaration over you that will name what has been forming in you beneath the surface all along. This message reached you by appointment, not by accident. It came at the hour when you were least likely to be distracted from it, because something in you is ready to hear what your mind has been too busy to name. Tonight is not about entertainment. Tonight is about recognition. Tonight is about the moment when your inner life stops being treated like a mystery and starts being understood as a witness to something real. And what is coming into view is not vague. It is not sentimental. It is not built on guesses. There are specific things you have been feeling, specific changes you have been noticing, and specific patterns that have been following you like a quiet shadow. I'm going to name them one by one, because the relief you need often begins when your experience is finally spoken back to you in plain language. Something has been happening to you, and part of what makes it difficult is that it does not look dramatic from the outside. It looks like small interruptions. It looks like a restlessness that appears for no reason. It looks like the way certain conversations no longer carry the same weight they used to carry. It looks like a strange distance from places that once felt normal. But underneath all of that, something deeper is moving. You may have noticed that you wake at the same hour again and again, as if your body remembers a meeting your mind has not yet been told about. It does not happen once and disappear. It returns, the same hour, the same quiet room, the same brief opening between sleep and waking, where you feel as if something is near, even if you cannot explain what it is. That is not random. That is not meaningless. It is a sign that your inner life is being called into attention. And it is not only the waking hour. You have also been carrying emotional waves that seem to rise without a clear cause. One moment you are steady, the next you are suddenly heavy, as if something unspoken has passed through the room and touched only you. You cannot always trace it back to a thought. You cannot always attach it to a memory. It arrives like weather. It moves through. It leaves you a little more honest than before, and sometimes a little more exposed. You have also felt the strange thinning of certain relationships and familiar exchanges. People who once had easy access to your attention now sound distant. Conversations that once felt full now feel hollow in ways you can sense immediately. Even if you do not say it out loud, you listen, but something in you no longer agrees to the old performance. That is not coldness. That is not failure. That is the beginning of clarity. And then there are the small repeated signs that make you pause for half a second and then continue as if you did not notice. Numbers appearing in places you did not expect. Messages arriving at precisely the moment you were thinking of a question. A phrase repeating through different mouths. A feeling that your attention is being gently pulled toward the same point again and again. not to confuse you, but to wake you up. You know the difference between coincidence and repetition. You know when something is trying to be seen. If any of that has been happening, then I want you to hear this carefully. These are not problems first. They are confirmations first. They are not proof that you are losing your footing. They are proof that your footing is changing. The waking hour is not there to torment you. The waves are not there to break you. The distance from old conversations is not there to punish you. Each one is a form of alignment, even if alignment is felt first as discomfort. Because when a life is being recalibrated, the first thing to move is often the feeling of ordinary things. What used to fit begins to feel narrow. What used to satisfy begins to feel thin. What used to keep you busy no longer keeps you covered. And that is why you have been sensing a quiet friction in the background of your days. Something in you is no longer able to pretend that the old arrangement is enough. Take a breath and let that settle. Do not rush past it. Sometimes the deepest recognition arrives gently, and it asks for enough stillness to be heard. If even one of those signs has landed in you, if your shoulders loosened while I was naming them, type 888 in the comments. That number is a sign of overflow, of something opening wider than before, of a life no longer being held in the smallest possible shape. Type 888, then come right back to me. But there is something beneath these signs, and that is where the real seeing begins. Beneath the waking hour, beneath the waves, beneath the hollow conversations and repeated numbers, there is one pattern that has been working through your life for a long time. It is not chaos, it is not laziness, it is not lack. It is the pattern of reaching with sincerity toward things that no longer match the size of who you are becoming. You have been trying to stay faithful to methods that once made sense, but now only make you feel tired. You have been investing heart, attention, and effort into things that require a version of you that is already passing away. You have been pulling on ropes that are no longer attached to anything, and because you are earnest, because you are conscientious, because you do not like to abandon what once mattered, you have mistaken depletion for devotion. That is the pattern. Quietly, consistently, almost invisibly, it has followed you across different areas of life. You over-explain when a simple truth would be enough. You overcarry when something was never yours to hold alone. You keep trying to make old doors open with the keys of a different season. You remain emotionally available to arrangements that have already stopped returning your life in proportion to what you pour into them. And perhaps the most difficult part is that this pattern has often looked noble from the outside. It has looked like patience. It has looked like perseverance. It has looked like loyalty. In reality, it has often been a form of misplaced strength. You have been giving your best attention to systems, people, expectations, and habits that do not know how to receive it properly anymore. This is why the exhaustion has felt so specific. It is not the exhaustion of having done too much for too long in a healthy direction. It is the exhaustion of continuing to pour into a shape that no longer contains your measure. It is the fatigue of using a full heart to sustain a container that was always too small. And the cruel part is that the outside world can mistake that fatigue for weakness when it is actually evidence of mismatch. You were never wrong for trying. You were never foolish for hoping. You were never less than faithful because something in you kept insisting that love, meaning, or purpose should be this hard. But the truth is quieter and more freeing than that. Not every delay is a denial. Not every closed door is a rejection. Sometimes the thing you keep pushing against is not a wall. It is simply a boundary, announcing that the old approach has finished its work. That is why the cost of staying inside this pattern has been so subtle. It does not always arrive as one dramatic failure. Sometimes it arrives as a slow dimming. Your joy becomes more cautious. Your confidence becomes more negotiated. Your voice becomes more edited. You start to live with a slight inward stoop, as though you are trying to make yourself fit beneath a low ceiling that was never meant to stay over your head. And yet even here, I do not speak to blame you. I speak to recognize you. You have been surviving with a kind of dignity that deserves to be named. You kept showing up in places where others would have stopped long ago. You kept returning to sincerity even after disappointment. You kept telling yourself that if you could just hold a little longer, the next thing would finally make sense. But there is a layer beneath this one, and this is the place where the root is revealed. Imagine a tree whose roots were once growing freely, reaching deep into soil that could hold its life. Then imagine that long ago, something around those roots changed. Maybe the ground hardened, maybe the light shifted, maybe the tree was planted where it could survive, but not fully stretch. Over time, the trunk still rose, the leaves still moved. From a distance, everything looked alive. But underneath, the roots learned to grow in constrained directions, bending toward whatever little moisture they could find. That is what has happened in you. Not because you failed, not because you lacked strength, but because somewhere along the way, your root system learned the shape of survival instead of the shape of freedom. You may have been taught without words that staying small was safer. You may have learned that being useful was more acceptable than being expansive. You may have absorbed the atmosphere of a place, a family, or a season in which direct self-expression was not fully welcomed. And so your deeper voice adapted. It did not disappear. It went underground. It became quieter, more cautious, more economical with its own truth. And now you are feeling the consequence of that adaptation. The soul does not remain silent forever without sending signals. The body begins to wake at odd hours. The emotions begin to move in waves. The old conversations lose their charge. The repeated numbers appear like taps on the window of your attention, not because you are broken, but because the part of you that was made to stretch is no longer content to live as if the pot was still big enough. This is not a sign of failure, it is a sign of root pressure. The life in you is pressing against the old container. The root that once had to survive is now asking to grow as it was meant to grow. And that asking often feels tender at first, because anything that has been held down for a long time does not rise with ease. It rises with memory. It rises with grief. It rises with the strange ache of realizing how much of your strength was spent on shrinking. So if the tree image is landing in you, if you can feel what it means to have grown upward while your roots were asked to remain cautious, type "I see it" in the comments. Let the recognition seal where it has just landed. Type "I see it," then come right back to me. Stay with me, because the return is not a theory. The return is already beginning where the root is allowed to breathe again. What you are being invited into is not more effort, it is return, not a strategy, not a performance, not a program of self-repair. Return. The kind of return that happens when something in you stops arguing with its own deeper design and begins to receive itself again with honesty. You do not need to become more impressive to deserve this. You do not need to prove your readiness by exhausting yourself further. You do not need to earn a place in your own life. What is being asked of you is far gentler and far stronger. Receive what has already been pressing toward you. Receive the recognition, receive the release, receive the permission to stop treating every closed root as a personal verdict. There are two practices I want to place in your hands, not as homework, but as anchors. The first is the morning naming. When you wake, before you negotiate with the day, name one thing that is true without trying to fix it. Not a plan, not a performance, a truth. I am tired. I am ready. I am no longer willing to force what is complete. Let the morning begin with honesty instead of acceleration. The second is the threshold pause. Before you enter a conversation, a task, or a place where you usually become smaller, stop for one breath and ask inwardly, am I entering as myself, or am I entering as the version I learned to present? That question does not shame you. It returns you. It makes room for the part of you that has been waiting to stand upright again. These are not ways to control the outcome. They are ways to steward the life already moving through you. Stewardship is different from striving. Stewardship says, I will tend what has been given. Striving says, I must force what is missing. One makes room, the other makes noise. One lets the root breathe, the other keeps the soil packed down. And as you begin to live from that difference, something subtle but unmistakable starts to happen. The effort that was scattered becomes gathered. The voice that was hesitant becomes cleaner. The energy that was leaking into old attachments begins to come home. You do not become a different person. You become less divided. That is the return. That is the mercy. That is the deeper meaning of what has been unfolding around you. If something in this message confirmed what your spirit already knew, let your like be your amen without words. Not as a metric, as an agreement that what was named here was named correctly. And because this is not only for you alone, there is someone who came to mind while I was speaking. Maybe they are quietly tired, carrying more than anyone sees. Maybe they are secretly seeking something they do not know how to name. Maybe they have been holding a posture of strength so long that no one remembers they are allowed to soften. If that face came into your mind, send this to them as a delivery, not as a recommendation. Someone working harder than the people around them. Someone whose inner life is almost never visible. Someone who needs to hear that the pattern they have been living is not their identity. What you send to them is not merely a message. It is an act of care. It is a way of saying, I recognized what was happening in you, and I did not look away. And sometimes that is the beginning of relief for more than one life at once. There is a declaration now that has been forming across everything you have heard. It is not about becoming someone else. It is about no longer abandoning who you are when the old shape of living asks you to. What has been true in the hidden place must now be spoken in the open place. What was scattered must be gathered. What was dimmed must be honored. What was waiting must be allowed to stand. Before this closes, type the words, I am the one in the comments. Not as a wish, not as a hope, as a confirmation. Let your fingers do what your spirit is already beginning to know. Type, I am the one, then come right back to me. You are confirmed, you are gathered. You are no longer required to shrink to be safe. You are no longer bound to the old container. You are being restored to your own measure. You are allowed to stand where your life has been waiting for you. You are allowed to receive without apology. You are allowed to move without forcing. Right now, all across the world, others are receiving this same recognition in their own quiet way. They are not all in the same room, and yet they are part of the same unseen gathering. They are the ones who have felt the shift before they could explain it. They are the ones who know that something has been opening beneath the surface. They are not alone in hearing this, and neither are you. It is sealed. You have not missed the moment. You have not been overlooked by the silence that has been gathering around your life. You have been standing inside a shift so quiet that only the deepest part of you could hear it. And that is why the world around you kept moving as if nothing was happening. But something has been happening, something real, something complete. And you can feel even now that this is not the kind of change that announces itself with noise. It arrives like dawn. It arrives like the end of a long winter that no one else noticed you were surviving. There is a kind of ache that becomes familiar when you have carried it too long. You begin to treat it like atmosphere. You begin to call it personality. You begin to think the heaviness is simply the shape of your life. But it is not the shape of your life. It is the residue of an old season that has finally reached its limit in you. That is why the old effort no longer feels noble. That is why the old explanations no longer feel convincing. That is why the old burden now feels louder than the voice that once carried it. You do not need to be ashamed of the place you reached before this moment. You do not need to apologize for how long you stayed where you were. You were faithful in the only way you knew how to be faithful at the time. You were trying to hold what you thought still needed holding. You were trying to keep breathing inside a room that had already begun to close. And even then, something in you was preparing for this exact hour. Because the truth is this: the shift you have felt was never meant to confuse you forever. It was meant to bring you here. It was meant to make the false weight unbearable so the true weight could return. It was meant to let the old arrangement grow impossible so your spirit would stop negotiating with what has already ended. That is why the questions have gotten sharper. That is why the longing has become more specific. That is why your inner life has started refusing what used to be enough. You are not losing yourself. You are meeting the edge of what can no longer define you. There is a difference. One is collapse. The other is clearing. One leaves you empty. The other leaves you available. And what is opening in you now is not emptiness. It is space. It is the space that appears when a soul stops forcing itself into a smaller version of its own truth. And I want to say this with great tenderness: you do not need to rush to name the whole future from here. You only need to recognize what has already been speaking: the waking hour, the quiet waves, the conversations that now feel thin, the repeated signs that keep returning until you can no longer honestly pretend they are random. These things have not come to disturb you without purpose. They have come to loosen you from the old order of living so you can stand in the one that is already forming. There is a depth in your life that has been asking for your attention for a long time, and it does not ask like a stranger. It asks like something that knows your name. It asks through discomfort, through repetition, through the holy irritation of being unable to remain as you were. And once you stop resisting that asking, a strange peace begins to enter. Because you realize the pressure was never only pressure, it was invitation. You may have thought the discomfort meant something was wrong, but often what feels like wrongness at first is only the friction of transformation passing through a place that has gotten used to stillness. A door makes a sound when it opens after being shut for a long time. A root makes resistance when it pushes toward water. A heart makes ache when it is being asked to love without the armor it once relied on. So do not call every friction a failure. Some friction is simply evidence that life is moving again. What has been forming in you is not fragile. It is not uncertain. It is not new in the shallow sense. It is ancient in you. It is older than the fear that tried to contain it. Older than the habits that narrowed it, older than the voices that trained you to mistrust the very place in you that knew what was true. That old knowing has not left. It has only waited for enough stillness to be heard again, and now that stillness has arrived in the form of this moment, this hearing, this recognition. You are not being asked to solve everything. You are being asked to receive what is already clear. You are being asked to let the next step be simple enough that your soul can actually take it. No more overcomplication, no more pretending confusion is safer than clarity. No more bowing to the old atmosphere when the air has already changed. The relief you have wanted is not hidden behind a perfect explanation. It is hidden inside agreement. Agreement with what you know. Agreement with what you have sensed. Agreement with what has been returning to you in pieces until now. When you stop arguing with the evidence of your own becoming, the pressure begins to release. The spirit does not need to be forced open. It needs to be recognized. And that recognition is not passive. It changes your stance. It changes the way you stand in a room. It changes the way you answer what no longer deserves your life. It changes the way you hear silence. It changes the way you read a delay. It changes the way you hold a disappointment. The same events can still occur, but you no longer belong to them in the same way. That is what freedom often looks like in its earliest form. Not spectacle, separation, not noise, return. You have been living under a pressure that was never meant to be permanent. You have been carrying meanings that were never meant to be final. You have been treating a temporary formation as though it were your forever. But forever was never the shape of this burden. It was only the shape of the season, and seasons end quietly before they end visibly. First, the inner weather changes, then the outer world catches up. This is why patience has felt so complicated. It is not that patience failed you, it is that patience without recognition becomes endurance, and endurance without recognition becomes fatigue. But you are not meant to live forever in fatigue. You are meant to cross into a more honest kind of steadiness, one that does not depend on forcing what has already outlived itself. Let this settle into you slowly. You do not have to fight your own becoming. You do not have to explain away the change. You do not have to apologize for sensing that a chapter is complete before everyone else can see the closing line. Your life is not less real because it is being rearranged in quiet ways. It is more real. The deepest shifts are often the ones that first occur in silence. And because this silence can feel lonely when you are inside it, I need you to hear this too. You are not the only one standing in this hour. Others are here. Others are listening. Others are recognizing the same hidden movement in their own lives, even if they have not said it aloud. There is a shared intelligence in this kind of hearing, and it gathers people who would never otherwise know they are part of the same unfolding. You are moving from carrying to consenting. You are moving from forcing to receiving. You are moving from asking old structures to protect you into allowing truth to orient you. This is not a small transition. It changes the whole inner climate. It changes what you tolerate. It changes what you name. It changes what you no longer call home. And the remarkable thing is that once you consent to the truth already pressing against your awareness, the path ahead does not need to be dramatic to be real. It only needs to be honest. Honest enough to release what is finished. Honest enough to honor what remains. Honest enough to let the next step be smaller than your fear had imagined, but truer than your fear had allowed. You do not owe the past a permanent seat. You do not owe the old weight your whole future. You do not owe every familiar burden another season of your breath. There is a place in you that already knows how to set things down without becoming empty. There is a place in you that knows how to leave behind what has completed its work. There is a place in you that knows how to live lightly without living shallowly. And from that place, even now you can begin to feel the difference between carrying and consenting. Carrying clenches, consenting opens, carrying argues with the moment, consenting listens, carrying keeps proving, consenting keeps receiving. That is why peace has not arrived as a reward for exhaustion. It arrives as the natural atmosphere of truth, when truth is finally allowed to stand. If this message has confirmed what you already knew, let your like be your amen without words, not as a metric, as an agreement that what was named here was named correctly. And there is someone who came to mind while these words were being spoken. Maybe they are quietly faithful, carrying more than they ever admit. Maybe they are inwardly tired, but still showing up with a dignity nobody praises. Maybe they are searching for a sign that they have not missed their season. If their face appeared in your mind, send this to them as a delivery, not as a suggestion. Someone tender, someone burdened,